Does anybody here enjoy traveling? Show of hands. We got a couple. Okay, are you guys excited to travel? Are you guys doing any traveling for Christmas? No? Thankfully, Andrea and I's extent of our traveling is going to be about a 2-hour drive. It's not awful, but I'm already not looking forward to it. Again, not that bad. It's just one of those things where you just look forward in the holidays and you're like, oh, I'm going to drive. Just hope it doesn't snow. But as we get closer to Christmas, I think about a journey that had to be made. Some traveling that had to be done. Right? Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem. And I just think of how awful that would be. Right? I'm over here complaining about a 2-hour drive. Mary was very pregnant. I will never experience that, but I can imagine traveling is not fun when you're extremely pregnant, especially 90 miles over the course of 4 days, all because Caesar made a decree. He said, you know what, let's have everybody go to their hometown so we can take a census. And this wasn't a, let's see how many people I rule census. This is just for taxes. Right? That's the real reason he had the census take place. And this had never been done before. And if we read in Luke chapter 2, it states, in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each of his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. First off, I'd like to note that I had zero issue pronouncing the word Quirinius due to Walnut Grove, because a long time ago, I was in a play, and I had to memorize exactly how all the names were pronounced. And it took me 14 days to remember Quirinius. So I just wanted to get my flex out there. And thank you, guys. I can picture one, Mary being like, this is going to stink. Right? It says she gets there and then she has the kid. So we're talking like any day now. Stress induces labor. She could have had it on the way. Picturing myself in Joseph's shoes, I would have been like, no, forget the government. He just wants to collect his taxes. I'm not making you travel all this way. Forget it. We're just going to stay here. We'll go after you have the kid. Or I'll go by myself. You wait here. Right? But Bethlehem was important. There's a reason they had to go to Bethlehem. You wonder why. I wondered why. I didn't know much of the history of Bethlehem. And as we started working through, who's going to be preaching when with the preaching team, I got week 2, which is peace, but also Bethlehem is what this candle represents. So I thought, why include Bethlehem, right? Just make it peace. That's so much easier to preach on, right? There's millions and millions of things about peace. So as I started doing some research, I groaned a little bit because I realized I'm going to have to kind of do this in a history lesson-esque way. And Aaron is much better at it than I am. And I'm not good at doing history lessons, but I will do my best to stay on track and not have to digress too much. So Bethlehem is mentioned 41 times in just the Old Testament. 41 times. This is before Jesus' birth. So even all the Gospels that mention it and tell their own version, 41 times before that. Over 12 books, through the course of 1,300 years, Bethlehem is mentioned. Bethlehem means house of bread, which of course, knowing now, that's pretty interesting. Jesus was born in the house of bread. He becomes the living bread. that we just took part in remembrance. It's a pretty epic foreshadowing for a place named thousands of years before the man was actually born. Foreshadowing is very important. There's a lot of tie-ins in the Bible. There's a lot of prophecy in the Bible. And so if you don't know where to start, go back to the beginning. That is Aaron's motto that I picked up from him. So to start with Bethlehem, let's go to Genesis. Genesis 35, 16 through 20 says, "Then they journeyed from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, 'Do not fear, for you have another son.' And her soul was departing, for she was dying. She called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day." Interesting. So the first mention of Bethlehem is Rachel, right? And there's a lot of branch-off stories that I want to go into to give more context because they're important and pivotal parts, but I don't have the time today. So look into Jacob and Rachel, who later becomes Israel, right? That's a very old-time, beginning cornerstone mark and story in the Bible. So hopefully you guys know it, and we can continue on. 1,100 years after Rachel dies, a prophet named Jeremiah writes, let me find it, 31:15, Jeremiah 31:15. "Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more." Well, that's kind of weird. What is this dude writing about Rachel who died 1,100 years ago? About her children that died. Her son lived. Benjamin made it through the labor. Well, what's cool is, even longer time passed, Matthew ties it all together. In chapter 2, 16 through 18. Matthew writes, "Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. He sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and in that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted, for they are no more." Jeremiah prophesied that later on, connecting through this whole story that Rachel weeps for these children. That although this is an awful, horrendous act, tied into this story, Rachel's weeping for them. The beginning of Bethlehem ties all the way to Jesus' birth. So Bethlehem is known as a place of sorrow from that story, from Rachel passing there. Bethlehem then becomes a city of redemption through the story of Ruth. I don't know how many of you guys know the story of Ruth, but it's another one that I can't run too far off of. Ruth left everything that she had to follow her mother-in-law. And according to customs in that day, women just couldn't be without a husband. They couldn't take care of themselves. They couldn't have jobs. They couldn't really earn money. So Ruth and her mother-in-law needed someone to step forth and take care of them. And when they got to Bethlehem, which is where her mother-in-law was from, a man named Boaz stepped up. And we'll look at Ruth 4:11. It says, "Then all the people were at the gate, and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthy in Ephrath, and be renowned in Bethlehem. So Boaz takes Ruth as his wife, and everybody celebrates and lifts her up. Says, you will be one of the great ones remembered here from this story. And you might wonder, well, why is Ruth's story really that important? Yeah, you tie it into redemption, so that's nice. But Ruth is important. Boaz is important. Because if we continue on, it gives us the genealogy of David. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. So now we have this tie-in of this redemption and where David will be born. As we read in Luke 2, it says that Joseph had to return to Bethlehem, the city of David. So this little town of Bethlehem was a place where David was picked from being a little shepherd boy into this big, larger-than-life character. This man who would defeat Goliath, who they would say would be a man after God's own heart. From Bethlehem he came. In 1 Samuel 16:12, it states that God looks at him and finds favor with him. I can only imagine what a beautiful sight that would look like. So now we have this tie-in of this lineage from Bethlehem into David. But why does that matter? Why is the prophecy saying Jesus would be born from David's line matter? It matters because David was a king. Not only was he a king, but he was the greatest king that Israel had ever seen. Nobody could beat him in battle. Nobody was more favored or loved than David was. David was a human, though. David made some bad decisions. David fell from that high place that he sat on the throne. But it's prophesied in 2 Samuel 7, 12, and 13, and again in Isaiah 9, 6 through 7, that the Lord will provide someone through the line of David from Bethlehem who would take that throne, who would sit on it forever, who would bring peace and righteousness back to the Israelites. So you're like, okay, well, Jesus is that fulfillment, right? This is amazing. This is awesome. Why then do we go from his birth to him getting older and the people disliking him? So we've got this history about Bethlehem. Let's talk about peace. The people of Israel got some stuff mixed up. What they thought God was promising them was this great ruler, was another David. The man who would free them from the Romans, who would overthrow the empire, who through battle and vengeance would bring them back to being the great Israel that they once were. It's not what Jesus came to do. Bethlehem is important. And Bethlehem is one of the smallest places you can connect everything to. Jesus wasn't this great king coming from Israel or Rome, from Bethlehem. And such a busy time that they couldn't even get a hotel. Could you imagine how frustrated and mad you would be if you're like, what do you mean you don't have room? She's pregnant. Look at her. She's going to pop any minute. Find us a room. And they're like, no, there is no room. So he's born in a stable, placed in a manger. It's a food trough. What glory of a king could you boast about? Jesus had nothing to boast about. Jesus was the least of these. Jesus was meekness. Jesus was peace. And the Israelites hated him for it. They didn't want peace. They wanted vengeance. They were mad because Jesus, the peace that he brought, wasn't for the Israelites. It was for everyone. It's another thing they got mixed up. They're like, well, we're God's children. This is what you came here for. And Jesus said, no, I came for all of you. the people who don't deserve it, the people that were maybe moaning and groaning about having to visit. Every single one of us has that opportunity. And I know it's very easy to get frustrated in this time of how Christmas is becoming more and more askew every year, it feels like. It's more about gifts. It's more about just getting time off from work. Can't even say Merry Christmas anymore. It has to be Happy Holidays. We are still called to fulfill that peace he brought. Jesus died for all of us and said, I am leaving, but the one who is coming after me is even greater, and he will be with all of you. Sounds like a task to me to keep doing what he was doing. And so as easy as it is to fall into the pitfalls of stress and of worry and fighting to keep the words we can use for Christmas, or not wanting to go visit family. Heck, there's some family I don't even talk to anymore. Am I being a keeper of peace? It's something I have to think about. Because I don't think Jesus is sitting in heaven going, party for my birthday. Get the best gifts that you can find. I don't think he's sitting there thinking, just read the story and you're good. No. He's sitting up there like, you take communion every week to remember the price that I paid for you. Once a year, keep in mind what this is all about. Even if it's just that one day, bring peace. Be the peace. If you're sick and tired of how people are treating each other, then let it begin with you. Because if we're not upholding it, if we're not being that, then who is? From the things that I see and hear, it doesn't look like it's going to be anyone else. The story of Bethlehem is important. Of the sadness that has happened, that is still happening in that place. The redemption through Ruth. And then also its precise placement in the story of Jesus. Please, if nothing else, be the peace. I'm going to pray. I'm going to allow Aaron to come back up.